As we saw in our previous exercise, we can create functions for most of the parameters that we find on a node, which, whilst brilliant, can get a little tiresome if we want to control quite a few parameters via functions, as we will need to keep swapping between all of the function graphs that will be created. Which is where variables can come into their own, as these allow us to create all of our function logic inside just a single graph, and then assign this as the controller for different options on our node. Meaning, we can add a single node to the parameter that we want to control, and then have them reference a variable of our choosing. If that makes little sense, don't worry, as we will be seeing it in action. Continuing from where we left off then, we can see that our graph has several tabs running across the top, and so let's click on our effects map, and then increase our iterate node's iterations value by clicking on it, and setting it to around about 400, which should give us 400 blades of grass in our 0 to 1 space. Because each of these is slightly see-through, the alphas in the stack are making our blades look much brighter than they should, which does show us that the iterate node is working, as the blades are clearly being stacked on top of one another. What we need to do now then is set up a function to randomize those positions, and so let's click the function button on our luminosity to jump back into that function graph. Remember, we're going to create all our function logic in a single graph, in our case, the luminosity graph, but then get it to affect other controls such as position from here. Now the position function has two control parameters in Substance Designer, which is x and y, or u and v to cover the 0 to 1 space. What we may want to do though is use just a single parameter and then have a function randomize things a little, again cutting out some of the manual work involved. Because we are using the iterate node, of course, this randomized function will be called for each of the blades of grass that we have, thus giving each one a unique position inside the effects map's 0 to 1 space. Let's press the spacebar key, add a new float node via the spacebar search, and then set its value to 2. With it selected, let's press the spacebar again, and this time type the word random, and then click to add a random function node. And with it selected, we can press the Ctrl+C and Ctrl+V keys in order to give us a copy. We have done this because, as stated, we do need two values to control position, so doing things this way will give us a random value for both the x or u and y or v parameters. We do need to combine these into a float2 value though, as we will need to set up a node as the output, and of course we can only have one node set to be the output. To tackle that problem, let's select the top random node, press the spacebar key and type the words vector float, and then choose the vector float2 node, which will bring our two random float numbers into a single node, whilst at the same time retaining the two separate information channels. Let's make sure that both nodes are piped into the vector2 node then. Okay, so that is our function for creating random position information, but of course we've created this setup inside the luminosity control. So how do we get it now to affect the position value for each of our blades of grass? Well, this is where our variables come into play. Let's make sure that we have the vector float2 node selected so that we can press the spacebar key, type the word set, and choose the node of the same name. What this node will allow us to do is assign the information being piped into it, so our two random float values, to a variable that can then be referenced. Let's give this a clear descriptive name such as position underscore random, and then highlight the text and right click to copy it so that we can reuse it in a moment. Let's come back to the effects node graph and click the quadrant node, and then in the pattern offset controls where we see our two float values, let's add a new empty function, and then click to enter its graph. Now we simply press space and type get, choose the Get Float To Value option, seeing as we know the variables we created contain the two float values that we need, and then paste the variable name that we copied earlier, and press Enter. Now we should see the name appear in the node preview. Don't forget, as I have done many times before though, to set this Get Variable node to be the output via a right click. It is very easy to miss this step and end up spending 30 minutes pulling your hair out, asking why nothing is working. Let's go back to the luminosity function where our logic lies though, as we currently have another problem. Our luminosity controls are set to be the output for this function, which means we can't choose the set variable node as the output without losing control over our luminosity. Well, thankfully, we can set up a sequence that will run through all of the function logic one step at a time. With the random position variable node selected then, let's press the spacebar key, start to type the word sequence, and then, after choosing that node, pipe our very first float value into the second slot. After which we can right click on the sequence node and set it as our output. Problem solved. Straight away we see that position gets randomized, but we don't see 400 blades of grass. This is because we have yet to randomize the scale or rotation values of the effects map. Still, you can hopefully start to see that when we add the power of functions to our Substance Designer workflow, we can start to make some amazing tools.